Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going over Lab 2 in CIT 247. Now, as the name of the lab implies, we just basically go over some simple switch configurations. So, in other words, you'll just be making some basic configurations on Cisco switches. This lab basically is a rundown on that. Well, similar to how the first lab was a rundown on how to use GNS. So nothing too serious here. One major component of this lab will be they're learning how to use the command guides. So you can find these on Canvas, actually, when you sign into CIT 247. If you go right here, command guides, click on that and then download this. And then when you open it or unzip it, you'll have a whole bunch of command guides. You'll be using these throughout the semester, but for this lab, just use Lab 2 command guide. Now the command guide numbers match the number of the lab, so this is command guide 2, or Lab 2 command guide, and this is Lab 2. So match the command guide number to the lab number. So one thing about this lab you'll note is that it emphasizes the fact that you're going to be learning the command line interface for Cisco devices. Now, I can tell you from my experience as a worker in NQ's IT infrastructure team, although GUI solutions exist for configuring Cisco devices, a lot of the times you'll find that you actually have to use the command guide. Sometimes that GUI solution won't be available, and you'll need to sign into a switch and then configure it with a command line. Honestly, you might even end up preferring that method. Actually, a lot of the coworkers I have prefer that method. The thing of it is that it's pretty quick. You don't have to fight through a bunch of menus and stuff. Instead, you just type out what you want, and you get it done real quick if you know the commands. And that's why this class emphasizes teaching the command line. While GUI solutions exist for configuring Cisco devices, you'll find yourself a lot of the time needing to use the command line. And I can tell you from experience though that the command guide or command line for Cisco devices is much simpler than like Linux or Windows terminal configuration. So you don't have too much to worry about. Better yet, we actually provide all the commands you need through these command guides. So, which, by the way, is a feature that was not here when I took this course. What we did instead when I took it, we used the textbook to look up our commands, which you can still do it that way too. You can also look up on the internet, but you may end up finding commands that may not work. So my recommendation to you is always to use the command line, or excuse me, command guide when you're working on the labs. The reason I provide these and don't provide the commands in these documents, these instruction documents, is primarily to keep the length down of these. If I included all the commands you needed, these documents would be pretty long. So instead, I offload all those commands to these guides. Secondly, I provide these guides to help you with exams. So when you have an exam GNS or an assignment, you'll want to have all the commands you've used throughout the semester somewhere where you can easily access them. Now you can write them down in Notepad, which is actually what I did. The thing that is that takes up a lot of time, and that's why I provide these command guides. They're here to save you time, basically. So I highly recommend using them in the labs, and I also recommend using them for the GNS exams. But anyway, here's a rundown of how I organized these. I actually created these over a year ago, and they still hold up. And that's why I kept them. I actually haven't modified these. If you do notice anything that feels like it needs a modification, just let me know. But everything should be fine here. I've already had people go through these, and they worked throughout the years. So these should still work in this semester. But anyway, all command guides have a general command section on the left. These are basically the same commands that you'll be using in pretty much every lab. So tells you how to get into global configuration mode, tells you how to leave it, and it also tells you how to save your work on switches and routers. Very important that you always use this command and you use it frequently. Otherwise your work won't save, and well, let's just say that's not going to be very good. So you can also look up the commands to configure PCs. So I tell you how to put an IP address on a PC, how to see your configurations, and how to save. Now for switches and routers, there's a lot more commands to use, and that's why the general section doesn't cover all those. Instead, we cover them all with the new command section. So the commands you'll be using are provided on a module basis. So the new command sections will go over everything you'll be using that's new in each lab assignment. For example, right now you probably don't know how to configure an IP address on a switch. So, and you do that in this lab, so that command or that list of commands is provided. One thing that's very important here is the shortcuts. I write most of these commands in shortcuts. If not, I provide it as an alternative. The reason being is that these shortcuts are actually pretty important. They save a lot of time, they make you look pretty cool, and in general they are very helpful in like saving time, and I would say they're easy to remember too. Like instead of having to remember configure terminal, you just have to remember conft. It's a lot easier to remember. It's a lot easier to type out, where it puts less wear on your hands. I mean, the benefits of these shortcuts, honestly, you can go on and on and on. But the thing of it is that these commands here are actually pretty simple, like I said before. So instead of configuring an IP address how you do it on Windows, where you have to type a whole bunch of commands to just do it, all you have to do is type interface VLAN1 or into VLAN1. You configure an IP address with IP addr, and then you do the no shutdown command to enable the interface. As simple as that. To change your switch's host name, you just type global configuration, or excuse me, configure terminal or conft, and then you type the host name. And then after you're done, you exit and run the save command. That's all there really is to running all these commands on the switches and routers. I would always recommend once you enter global configuration mode, do what you need to do, exit, and then save. Run the save command in enable mode. As you can see here, this command only works in enable mode. Show commands can actually work in global configuration mode, which I'll demonstrate here shortly. But anyway, that's a rundown on the command guides. Oh, one more thing. The show commands you'll typically learn are going to be in the bottom of these documents. So if there's new show commands, look at the bottom. They'll be pretty helpful. Basically, you don't always have to run them, especially if you follow the instructions carefully, but sometimes it's good to just verify what you've done. I do recommend doing that as you work on the labs as well. Look at the show commands to see what your changes have done to the switch. It helps you really learn a lot. You learn a lot that way. But anyway, I'll go briefly over the layout of the lab. So the first part is just topology configuration. Just build your topology in GNS, and then configure IP addresses on the PCs. Note here in step 2 that you don't want to turn on your devices all at once. So right here I have 2 switches. If you press this, you'll turn on them both at the same time, but we don't want to do that in this lab. We want to just turn on the PCs right now. So what you do is right click and then press start. That's all there is to it. You can turn on one device at a time by doing that. But anyway, after that, you'll just be typing the save command, showing some screenshots, and then answering the question. Please make sure you answer these questions and provide these screenshots. They are a crucial component of getting points in this class. Second part will help you become introduced to the switch terminal and configuring the switch through it. So just follow these instructions. Most of this is just following instructions and reading. Basically, a lot of these instructions here explain stuff, and that's why I redesigned this class, to explain a lot of what you're doing with pictures and fairly lengthy explanations. Not too lengthy, but it should be enough that it should teach you and help you know what you're actually doing. But anyway, let's turn on a terminal. Let's go to a terminal. So as you can see here, all this text here and stuff like that, it's just a bunch of legal information, and then the ports and whatever. You don't need to really look at that stuff. That's what show commands are for. You can see interface with show commands, but if you press enter a few times in your terminal, you can finally access it, and you can type a bunch of stuff and whatever. But let's zoom in on this so you all can actually see what's going on here. You can actually do this for yourself. Whoopsie, it's the wrong way. So you can actually do this yourselves while doing the lab. Just you have to zoom the window out and then go to view and then press like zoom in or zoom out. Make sure you've got to boom this, or you're going to maximize the window. Otherwise, you won't have access to this menu here. I don't know why they do that, but that's just the way these windows work in your VMs. Anyway, so this is a Cisco switch terminal. Let's actually configure an IP address on the switch. So we're going to implement all these commands. So I've actually memorized these, so I don't really need to look back and forth at the command guide. But so the first step when you're configuring something, type global configure terminal or conft. So if you can tell you're in global configuration mode with this thing here, it'll say config. If you're in a sub command mode, it'll have like config and then something else, like it'll have config if or something of the sort. So note here, this is enable mode. You can tell with the little hashtag, and there's not being something in parentheses next to the switch name. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you actually turn on a real switch, you don't really get into this enable mode. Typically, you'll start like in the lowest level, and then you have to get into enable mode. But anyway, let's go ahead and configure an interface. So interface VLAN 1. So that's the interface we could put an IP address on. So to put an IP address on the switch, do IP adder. Actually, it's address, but you could type out adder instead of that for a shortcut. Then you type out the IP address. So there we go, IP address configured. Now, what we can actually do a show command if we wanted to. We could just exit and go to enable mode and do a show command. However, you can actually do show commands while you're in global configuration mode in its sub mode. To do that, you need to type in the word do. Start your show command with do. So do show IP interface brief. Let me extend this so you can see the output. So there's the interface we configured, VLAN 1. You can see the IP address. You won't see the mask here. Actually, you won't be using this command until you work on routers. This show IP adder, or let me see, yeah, show IP adder brief, or IP interface brief. It's not that important right now. But anyway, notice here, administratively down / down. That means the interface is completely disabled. You'll learn that in a later module, but basically, this is what happens when an administrator manually shuts down an interface. What that means is that the interface cannot receive traffic, nor will it be able to send anything out. It's completely worthless to us right now. And also, better yet, it's worthless to any malicious users. That's why you always want to shut down interfaces you're not using. But we want this interface up, so to do that, we type no shut or no shutdown. That's basically reversing the shutdown command. When you want to reverse a command in the Cisco terminal, type no before it, similar to how we type do before the show command. So if we redo the do command by pressing up or the page up key on our keyboard, we can bring up the command again without having to type it out, and we can check our interface and see that it's up. Now there's 3 ways you can exit configuration mode. You could type exit to get out of the sub mode and then exit again to get back to enable mode, or we could just type end and just immediately go back. You can also do Control Z if I'm correct. And let me look at the command guide. Yes, Control Z will also return to enable mode. I don't really use Control Z that much. Actually, I found that like in Cisco Packet Tracer, for whatever reason, Control Z does not work like that. Not really sure why, but it's safer probably just to get in the habit of doing end or exit. But anyway, that's how you configure a switch, and that's a lot of what you'll be doing in these next 2 sections. Honestly, this section just shows you how to basically get you used to using the command interface. Like it'll show you all the commands you can use and all that kind of stuff. One question here that you might all have a little trouble with is question 2.4. Basically, you'll need to write out these steps that a switch uses to learn the MAC address, the 2 entries in a MAC address table. The PowerPoint, I believe either the last module or this module, will be of great help here. Always go back to the PowerPoints for these questions. They will help you a lot. So the final section is just even more configurations on a switch, like putting an IP address like I did here. Basically what I did here, you'll be doing here when you do this lab. And you'll be doing some other stuff like running various show commands, making various configurations that you have in here, like in putting banners and enable passwords and so forth. You'll learn a lot from this lab, but it's not all too difficult. Just follow the command guide, and you should be good. This is not a hard lab by any means. It's actually pretty easy. But that's basically it. One more thing, please make sure to use your correct lab report like last time. Please make sure to answer all your questions there. Please do not submit this thing. Please submit the lab report. But that's basically it for this lab, or this lecture, I should say. Thank you very much for watching it, you all. I should emphasize, if anyone needs help, or you have any trouble with GNS, or don't know what you're doing, or just want to talk to me, please feel free to email and reach out, and I'll meet with you. Or I'll just answer you via email, whatever works for you, or works for the situation. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and learned something from it. Hope you have a good day, and enjoy the lab.